The world is dying. That is the reality of the situation. The human race's dwindling food supply is struggling to keep up with the growing population of the world. Leaving our beloved planet is becoming a more viable option by the day, especially for Will Crawford, and his estranged son, Aiden Crawford, is about to find that out. One strange afternoon, Aiden is invited to NASA, but it's not exactly the grand type of meeting you would expect. In what looks to be an old multimedia classroom, NASA scientists Joseph Sharp and Robert McGrady wait for Aiden. To Sharp's disappointment, unlike his father, Aiden is late. McGrady is hopeful, however, and we are about to see why. When Aiden arrives, he questions why he, of all people, was summoned. Sharp and McGrady try to explain the situation. His father's work revolved around space exploration, a fact that Aiden knew all too well, because while he was out exploring the world, he basically abandoned his family on Earth, until his eventual passing 6 years ago. Or so he thought. Much to Aiden's surprise, and quite frankly, anger, Sharp and McGrady inform him that despite what it looks like, his dad never actually passed away, not in the way we think he did. What happened 6 years ago was, in McGrady's words, beyond classified, even for Will's family. Will apparently wished for a closed casket funeral in the case of his disappearance, and that he would be buried, so that his family would no longer need to worry about his whereabouts. In fact, the circumstances of his disappearance years ago aren't clear, not even to the 2 NASA team members. All that they know is that he and his life's work on trying to find new habitable planets for the human race was important. And that important work now rests on Aiden's shoulders. Will Crawford, aside from being a space explorer and pioneer, is a researcher whose field of interest is the human mind. With that, Sharp introduces him to his late father's invention, the neuroinhibitor. It's a device that connects to a person's deep subconscious and manifests a new reality for them that allows them to travel to the farthest corners of the universe without ever physically leaving the room. Think of it like a VR machine on steroids. Will Crawford's body of work, according to Sharp, revolves around using the mind to traverse space and time so that they can find a new home. And, surprisingly, it worked. Will Crawford did find a planet that was close enough to the Earth's characteristics. He called it NB22, and it was found in the Andromeda Galaxy, far, far away from their own. 20 million light-years to be exact, according to Aiden. Of course, the idea of being able to space travel from the comfort of your home on Earth feels like an absurd idea, so naturally, Aiden doesn't really believe much of this, especially considering the fact that 6 years ago, they basically made him and his mother throw a closed casket funeral, with apparently no body inside. He grieved for nothing, and now, his colleagues want him to fulfill a mission his dad never finished. Considering the fact that Will never actually left the room, Aiden demands to see the body, but unfortunately, Sharp and McGrady tell him that they had to make the difficult decision of disposing of the body. It was decaying as though it were deceased. But, if they had a body, why are they still looking for Will? That is also Aiden's question. Sharp and McGrady explained to him that even 6 years after his demise, he was still helping the two out in discovering new planets and making new studies. He eventually stumbled upon NB22 recently, and that was when things went crazy. They lost track of Will all of a sudden, and he couldn't be found, not even by them. Now comes the big question, why call Aiden? Well, apparently, it wasn't just Aiden. The project has sent 11 other people out after Will, but none survived. These 11 people all had a transplant at the back of their head that enabled the neuroinhibitor to function smoothly. And so does Aiden. This comes as a shock to him, because all he could remember from years ago was a weird surgery. Turns out, his father had implanted the same technology on him, long ago. Sharp and McGrady believe that this was because Aiden was meant to continue in his father's footsteps, but Aiden doesn't seem to agree. He storms off, leaving Sharp and McGrady to question his qualifications again. Meanwhile, Aiden goes home, and we see him struggling severely with his mental health. Every night, while taking a bath, he also regularly takes pills to treat his mental illness, alongside seeing a shrink twice a week. His shrink tries to question him about how he's been doing. The past sessions, he has been nothing but stoic, and would only talk about surface-level things. But this time around, he suddenly brings up his father. He tells her that he was alive. At first, the shrink thinks that this was some metaphor, so Aiden elaborates. He was alive, and they buried an empty casket. The funeral was a sham. Metaphor or not, for her, this intrigues the therapist, and she feels like they've made good progress. Soon after, he returns to NASA and meets with Sharp and McGrady again, explain to him how the neuroinhibitor works. Like they said before, it taps into the subconscious. Everything that he would be experiencing are things that are manifested by his mind. They give this a go by letting Aiden run around a few test landing zones, which his father had built when he first started his project, using only his memories to form the training grounds. There, he sees things unlike any other. He gets to roam around a ship that his father designed and built himself. He gets to roam around entire planets that are just as uninhabitable as they are stunning. And finally, he gets to try out combat. In the landing zones, he can't actually get hurt, but it's important that he trains anyway. In his ventures into the unknown, he is bound to come across alien life that would not exactly be too happy with his presence. After that, he's tossed into the space jump, where he literally jumps into space. He panics for a bit, and Sharp reminds him that his breathing is key so that he can survive. After giving him some overview of what he might have to do, Sharp and McGrady talk to him about planets. He gets to explore an entire planet made of ice, but with an atmosphere that is extremely lethal. Sharp orients him on how looks can be deceiving, especially in space. Even a planet that looks almost identical to Earth can be filled with flowers that could eat you in seconds if you so much as sniff them. Will preach to the two NASA scientists that they should always know their surroundings, and that's exactly what Sharp and McGrady are trying to teach Aiden. When he gets pulled out, Aiden panics. Sharp explains, however, that everything he just experienced was not exactly real. They were programs designed by his father to prep him for the real NB-22. With that out of the way, the three head out for dinner at the canteen. There, McGrady tells him that it is time to send him over to NB-22, an hour before the attack that made his father disappear. McGrady explains to him that his job is to investigate and try not to bump into the 11 other projections that are there. Those projections are actually more like memories, and they will appear to be doing whatever they were doing prior to the attack. With all of these revolutionary discoveries, Aiden wonders how his father was able to keep everything under wraps. Turns out, according to Sharp and McGrady, the department knew, and he even briefed the Oval Office at one point. It just so happens that the U.S. military didn't find his project equitable. For $20 million per neuroinhibitor, it just wasn't worth it to them, especially with elections coming up back then. Eventually, the department they were working in was reduced to just the two guys and his father. After this training, Aiden returns to an old memory, a fond one, the one he keeps remembering, about his father coming home one day with a strange look on his face, like he has a secret. He told his therapist about this memory in the previous session, and he brings it up again now. He proposes the question whether the COVID virus was a way to balance out the equation of having more people than food supply. She frankly tells him that that would be genocide. With that, Aiden reveals that his father somehow found a way to solve the equation without doing that. With his exhibition to NB-22 coming near, he dumps his medicine in the sink and heads over to the office unexpectedly. He talks to McGrady and convinces him to take him to a different memory from after the surgery that put a device in his head, but before he disappeared. McGrady denies his request, saying that Sharp would never approve, but Aiden persuades him anyway by telling him that he could find his father in his own way. McGrady relents, and he sends Aiden over to a different time, to that moment from his childhood that he cherishes so much. There he was, so young, and watching TV. Then suddenly his dad walks in, and just sits on the couch to observe him, with that look on his face. Much to Aiden's surprise, his father can see him and interact. Aiden tries to question him about why he left, why he decided to abandon him and his mother for his life's work. He tells him that he failed to make him safe, because every night, he tries to and has to rely on pills and a shrink to feel normal. His father tries to explain that it was all for the greater good, for the sake of the survival of the human race. With that, Aiden tries to ask him where he was, but still, his father refuses to answer. And right on time, McGrady pulls him out of the simulation and tells him that it was a bad idea to do that. Turns out, his father has deprogrammed his locator so that no one could find him. He didn't want to be found. What their mission really was is to check whether NB-22 really is inhabitable or not. Aiden leaves, feeling dejected. He talks to his therapist that same night, and tells her that he will no longer be seeing her. The two argue about the point of all of it, the whole therapy thing, and getting well, considering the grander scheme of things. The argument gets heated, and he eventually keeps his promise and leaves. The following morning, he goes on his mission to land on NB-22. He sees the projections all around, moving like he's not even there. He sees his father's living quarters, and then right there on the colony, he sees the greenhouses that his father set up. Turns out, Will had done it. He really did find a livable planet. As he revels in the success, all of a sudden, he sees the attackers coming from the hills. Before he could get caught in it, Sharp pulls him out. Aiden demands to be put back in hopes of warning the other projections before the attack can even take place. Sharp refuses and tells him that what he wants is impossible. They were just memories. They are closer to ghosts than humans. What matters is that Will was able to sustain life on the planet there, and that was all they needed. Aiden tries to convince him, saying that the ones that attacked weren't going to let them come back, let alone let 7 billion people migrate onto their planet. He tells Sharp that his father warned them that the people that own the planet were going to keep attacking. Sharp is angered by the fact that McGrady let Aiden speak to his father in the first place. Still, Sharp agrees to put him back in, if that means they can find a way to save the projection, and save NB-22 in the process. When he does get in there, the attack is already happening. He tries to warn the projections, but to no avail. The attackers are coming from everywhere, and he is struggling to find cover. Sharp panics as well, and tells him that he needs to survive the attack, or else they won't be able to get him out of there alive. But, sadly, there are too many of them, and Aiden is eventually hit, and his physical body is affected in the process as well. Sharp then makes the difficult decision to talk to the director and tells him that he has the go signal to fix up another sham funeral, this time for Aiden. But there was something else in their experiment. When Aiden's signal went off, Sharp tells her that he received a beacon. One of the projections apparently made it out alive, and all he could tell from the beacon was that this projection was able to leave the planet. Still, even with that information, the director tells him to bury the intel and destroy the project. Sharp is dejected, and later tells McGrady to destroy the information, despite the fact that they weren't really sure if Aiden is really gone. Sharp tells him to keep the neuroinhibitor safe nonetheless. When he leaves, and McGrady starts packing up, the device receives a notification. McGrady checks it out on the laptop, and it turns out it is a message from Aiden. There is another chance for mankind. He and his father found a new home for them. Turns out, it was his father that made it out alive, because he programmed the neuroinhibitor to have some sort of escape plan where if they were ended, they would be remade. The other 11 had it too, and so did Aiden. Aiden tells McGrady to convince the rest to come to this new planet, and when the transmission ends, the neuroinhibitor starts back up again on its own. Their work isn't over yet.